Welcome, everybody, to the Problem Solvers podcast, where we crack the code on growing your business by tackling the challenges that keep revenue leaders up at night. I'm Carl Ortmans, and on today's episode, we're going to be diving into a unique challenge that's being discussed today constantly, and it's two letters: AI. But the topic isn't just AI, it's how are companies going to embrace AI as a force multiplier. So excited for that today. And to have the conversation with me today is Kyle Himmelwright. So Kyle and I connected, it's like more than 3 years ago now, through a CRO school where he actually taught a part of the course. And admittedly, we started to bond over a whiskey discussion as well as being former football players. Today, Kyle is a revenue operations executive. He's an advisor. He's a fractional executive. And today, he's going to share insights that has helped transform their company's approach. And it might just be the aha moment you need today to accelerate your business. But before we jump in, here's why this conversation matters. Imagine implementing just one strategy from today's discussion and watching your revenue metrics shift within weeks, not months. That's exactly what our goal of this podcast is. Let's talk about the revenue challenge that others have faced and how they solved it. As I like to say, success leaves clues, and we're going to highlight those clues for you. So let's solve some revenue problems. So before we dig in today, Kyle, thank you for being here, by the way. What
Pleasure.
industries or verticals do you work in? What are the selling motions? What size companies do you work with?
Yeah. First and foremost, happy to be here. Always glad to hop on and chop it up with you. I'm predominantly focused in tech and sort of tech adjacent companies, variety of stages. Sort of most recently, I've been focused a little more on startups and sort of scale up. So companies that are in that stage of quick and sort of hyper growth, needing to scale the business and operations, quickly and keep up with the pace of the market. And really, sort of that whole area is mostly, tech and tech adjacent. But I think it's the sprawl of AI is certainly expanding significantly, and I think there's a ton of opportunity outside of like your traditional, tech adopters. But the sort of motions, I'm in a unique situation in that I'm running operations for a startup and then doing some fractional and advisory role as well. So I have a company I'm working with, Luster, or running operations at, I should say. They are a more traditional kind of seat-based platform that is leveraging AI to build, a generative, essentially, AI training and enablement platform, which is really interesting. But it's more of kind of a seat-based traditional SaaS billing model. And then I am also working for a company that has more of a consumption-based model. And then I have a third one where it's more of a excuse me, PLG, sort of like user sort of freemium conversion, and then grow from there type of model with a consumption overlay. So that, coupled with my most recent experience at Pinecone, which was PLG and consumption. So I have a kind of a good spectrum of experiences, most specifically recently, across the board from a type of like go-to-market motion.
Yeah, I know the consumption side of things is fascinating. I know you and I have had several conversations on building consumption plans and pricing models and even trying to build out comp plans for consumption based. You're also the second person. Jonathan Tice and I talked a little bit about consumption. You're talking about, so I think there's a topic here that we should probably go into because I'm curious and it'd be great to learn even more from you as something in the future. But hopefully we can do that. So thank you for that. Now, how we got to the topic today is because I asked you, hey, Kyle, what's one of the most successful revenue initiatives you've led or an existing problem that you're solving today? And you immediately jumped at this topic of using AI as a force multiplier and you used an example of clay. Now, to kind of tee this up in my own mind is as you're talking about being a revenue rev ops executive and all the components, it really does come back to you as a rev ops leader, an executive, the person doing the work has to figure out how to integrate and involve all these tools and workflows. So now I have way more questions than I think when we started. But we had a good discussion around AI as we were preparing, and it brought me back to being an account executive and doing account research. And at the time doing account research, it was look on the website, LinkedIn was still LinkedIn, pull information down, go to the customer's website, look for their annual reports. And it was a lot of reading, it was a lot of places, and you try to put time bound to get triggers and information. But today, you can do that with Claude or Perplexity or ChatGPT or the number of tools that are out there, and you can get so much research and information in a very fast spectrum. And so when we come back to the topic, that's the of what does this topic mean about how you're solving and integrating AI and using it as a force multiplier? What does the force multiplier mean to you, and how are you thinking about this?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So to take a step back, I think you and I bonded over being football players. I frequently say like my brain, how I think, like my mental model is like one of relative simplicity. I like to kind of bucket things. It's just kind of how my brain processes. And like when admittedly, a quick aside, like when I joined Pinecone, like as uber technical a company as you can join, I am not. I come from like an operating background, so I know systems, I know technology, but I don't know AI, right? I don't
Mhm.
know all of the complexity and that goes underneath the covers of building generative AI. So like I went in there and there's a quite a bit of like, oof, am I out over my skis? I feel like I'm swimming in the deep end with a lot of people that have way bigger brains than I do. But where and kind of I was like, all right, well, how do I like bucket this, and how do I like think about it in a way that I can process it? And really where I landed was, I think there are two like buckets in my brain that AI falls into, specific to go to market, right? And it's either in one bucket it's sort of a replacement technology, and in the other bucket it's more of a force multiplier, right? And what I mean by that is like, um, you know I'll use an example. I'm not saying that I subscribe to it, but like, oh, AI can replace SDRs is
Right.
like, and it's just a one for one swap. Um, I tend to believe, or I'm in the camp of, I think using AI as a way to enhance the capabilities of the person is really where AI can shine. And so, as you referenced, there are tools that allow you to now essentially, compress what used to take hours of account research. And, you'd sit and, okay, here are my 10 accounts. I'm going to go and, as you said, you go through the list. I'm going to click here, do this. Da, 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 da. Now it's like click a button, and boom, like AI can generate this really nice synopsis. Here it is. And not only is it just coagulating and sort of ingesting and synthesizing the information, it's giving you it's layering something of value on top, right? So it's saying,
Mhm.
hey, like, given what our company is at XYZ, what our like problem statements are, here's how, based on everything I've just ingested about company over here that we're trying to sell into, here's how we would fit to them. Here are some ideas on like where you might be able to go. And so as like a seller, obviously you still have to vet that, right? Like you
Mhm.
still have to make sure, okay, does that track? Does that align with the mental model that I have in my head for how I want to sell, this account as the AE? And so I think that's really where I think AI really, really shines. I think like in the ability to do things at scale, ingest massive quantities of data and synthesize it quickly, give it and sort of give some actionable insights, to the end user. I think is really fascinating. Using it as, a co-pilot in coding. You hear a lot of companies that are going in that way, and that's something that's really, really fascinating. I think is aware it I think is really relevant. And then the last example I'll give is like, for Luster, the company I'm helping to build, using AI as sort of a predictive tool, right? And so, marrying up, looking at a rep's calendar, looking at essentially their baseline assessment as they go in. It sort of gives a competency map of all their skill sets. Looking at that, being able to scrape LinkedIn, seeing who's in the meeting, ingesting what they've posted, what their personality is, right? Do they see,
Mhm.
are they highly active? Da, da, da. And it's basically it's able to kind of coalesce all that into saying, hey rep, you need to practice this, and we can build a simulation for you to practice this call that's going to happen a day from now. And now you're going to be able to talk through all those things, right? And so it's in the case of
Mm,
Luster, it's really preventing revenue impacting mistakes, because traditionally, like, what do you do as a rep, right? You just, all right, I'm just going to fire live bullets at the customer, in and hope I don't screw it up, right? But the reality is you end up burning, as especially as a new rep, or if you're new to a company, you're going to end up burning a lot of opportunities that maybe you would have been able to simulate using AI. That's something you've never been able to do before, right? And so
mm,
it's like there are some real, um, order of magnitude opportunities and unlocks that AI has done, where it's like, hey, 2 years ago, none of this was possible. But now, like with the pace of change and like some of the generative stuff is be doing, it's like it's allowing for tooling and technology that is truly a force multiplier, right? And
mm.
so like to me, that's where I think about like really leveraging both AI and technology at scale. Because I think the other interesting piece is, I think with some of the developments of AI and some of these co-pilots and things, it's never been easier to build the technology, right? So you have, in addition to all this excitement and momentum around AI, there is now all of this momentum of like, wow, all these people that have really good ideas but don't know how to code or have never been able to code can now really do it relatively cheaply. And so you've seen also this explosion of like, now there's a gazillion different tools for
Mhm.
every single thing you want to do, right? And so it's like the challenge for a revenue operator, or any operator for that matter, is like, what tooling, AI included, do I invest in that's going to make my ultimately make the company and the go to market engine that I'm a part of the most effective version of itself.
It's interesting, and I'm just sort of putting this 2 and 2 together. So, Kyle and I talked about my background, but I spent about 5 years into the in industrial in automation and manufacturing. And listening to you talk about it kind of gave me an aha, is because in automation and manufacturing, they are looking for repetitive tasks that cause problems or issues that they can automate and have that where a person doesn't have to do it. Think of like I have to a bead a weld, or I have to, pick something up and move it around instead of having a person do it. In forklifts as an example, hey, let's put self-driving vehicles to go pick stuff up and take it to the other place. So it almost makes me think of connect where AI is today is to remove those low value tasks so that the human or the operator can work on higher value tasks versus spending all the time. I don't know if I'm way off, but there seems to be a connection there of what they were doing then and how they're doing it now, and what AI is effectively doing in the moment for us.
Yeah, I think it's a very astute observation. I think there's a lot of parallels in that analogy, and I think there is kind of a critical component of it that I don't want to say gets overlooked, but I think it should be an important piece of the equation as you're considering, investment in technology or AI. And it's like, it sounds really basic, but it's like, what is the outcome you're looking for? And like in the case of manufacturing and mass production, the outcome you're looking for is as consistent an
Mhm.
output as efficiently as possible, right? So you want these things where human error ultimately is an issue. You want to try and minimize that as much as possible. To your point, so like a bead welder or whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
if you automate the technology, it's going to be more consistent than a human, and it's more efficient and whatever. I think what is interesting when you look at go to market, and what the thing that I try to consider is like, what is the outcome? And I have a good example of like going back to this idea of replacing, or the idea of AI SDRs, or even more specifically, I think a really common and popular use case right now for generative AI is like being able to personalize, um, create hyper personalized but hyper scalable outreach, right? Like
Mhm.
outbounding as a rep. I mean, I'm sure you think so fondly back on your days of prospecting, right? But like, I've seen a million things on LinkedIn. Outbound's dead. This is this. This is that. Um, you know, I think what is interesting is like if you really boil it down, really good personalized outreach is exactly that, right? It
Mhm.
is customized, it is thoughtful, it is something that inherently is like I don't want to say irreplicable, or I'm sorry, irrepeatable, but like the whole point of it is it's bespoke, right? It's nuanced to the recipient. And so like
Mhm.
there is this ultimate sort of like desire to create something that like makes this hyper personalized thing. But like I would say that shouldn't be the outcome. If you want the ability to create hyper personalized custom outbound, a rep should do that, right? And but like this is where you kind of get into this point of like, but then how is a rep effective, right? And so now you get into this idea of, well, you can do, consistent, somewhat customized outreach through
Right.
automation, of which I think is great. But if there is stuff that you really want to personalize, you shouldn't try and automate it. You should try and actually put your mental horsepower on crafting the best possible message that will resonate with Carl, the buyer of whom I'm trying to get in touch with, right? And so I think there is a part where it's like you absolutely should try and automate the things that are consistent, mundane, and like sometimes have either a high level of human error or a lack of human engagement just because it's a something that they don't want to do or whatever the case is. Like that stuff should be automated, and I think is really good for that. But I don't think the goal should be always to like oh, because we have generative AI now, we can just repeatably do this thing, right? It's not an exercise in mass production. It's an
Mhm.
exercise in understanding and sort of characterizing or categorizing, I should say, what things you want, what things need to be custom, and then what things need to be consistent and repeatable, right? And I think the latter are the best fit for automation.
Yeah, and it make like what you're saying is resonating. It's making a lot of sense because how many conversations you get into, or just even open up LinkedIn. It's like, hey, I get it. This is an AI driven message. I'm sick of the bots. I'm sick of the
Right.
spam. And so it almost feels like what's old is new again, right? So
Mhm.
that personalized touch, like in this notion of the SDR side, and it's not to harp on this, but it's a good sort of thought provoking idea. And when so maybe if we sort of transition a little bit to what you're doing is when you think of those force multiplier technologies, the ones like what are the ones that you're really excited about, the ones that you're thinking about, like what are they and how do you translate it to the teams that you're working with?
Yeah. So I think, like I said,
And
I
this is
am
not
very
to be make a commercial. This is not a sponsored anything. It's just
no,
genuinely curious of like what are those technologies you see that are force multipliers?
sure. And I should say, like, I am, someone who is in ops, and so the things I focus on and the things I think about are certainly biased to my experiences. But one of the things that is most common um, in RevOps is like this notion of doing more with less,
Right.
and it's like it's this age old sort of discussion of like, oh well, like how can you get one person to do the work of 10, and like so where I tend to focus is like I will die on the hill of like if you have a one man rev ops team and you're at any amount of scale, like you're under resourcing and you're dooming your business, right? You have to, if it's something that's important to the business, it always cracks me up. Like, oh, we want a world class rev ops team. It's like, oh, okay, or any function for that matter. You want a world class this, yeah, but like we're only gonna invest in two people, and then we're just gonna try and like magnify those people into 50, right? And so
Right.
it's like there's a balance, but what I think about is like how do I hire really good people who are really really forward thinking, who are true masters of their craft, and then enable them with tools that's going to magnify those talents, right? It's going to
Mhm.
allow them to be even more efficient, right? So taking some of the more mundane tasks or some of the things off of their plate, that's like, hey, I don't want to do that. So like thinking about tools that are orchestration based, right? Clay as an example, is one that's really popular right now, and I think it's popular because it's it's malleable, right? It can do so many things, right? It can do data enrichment. It can do basically advanced workflows. It can do automation. It really acts as kind of like this orchestration sort of tool that pulls together a lot of different things, and it gives you so much flexibility where like basically it meets you where you are. It says like,
Mhm.
hey, we'll take whatever tools you have and we'll help you marry them together into a mesh that allows you to really build an effective workflow. And I think like that's really cool because Clay is a good example of a tool where it's like you're not necessarily constrained by the limitations of, say, Salesforce or whatever your system of record is, right? You have this tool that layers that kind of integrates with everything and allows you to build in the construct that you have in your head, where it's like, oh, I would love it if. How many times have you been in a system where you're like, I wish it did this? And it's like, okay, with Clay and some of these other tools, you can basically take that data and then manipulate it and build it and then and form it into something that you have. So it provides a lot of flexibility. It provides a lot of uh it just kind of magnifies the creative parts. Like I'm thinking of when I've worked with like the most talented Salesforce and systems people I know, right? Like if you give them a tool like that allows them to pull the different pieces of systems and data points together, like it's a really, really powerful thing. And doing it in a way that is then repeatable. You can do some of these things and it's not you don't have to hire an army of 50 people to build it. Is
Mhm.
really important. But which isn't also to say like, I mean, Clay is it's not just a plug and play tool, right? Like it's something you
Yeah.
have to have like to be really impactful with. You have to have a relative mastery level of understanding of it, right? And so that's an example. I kind of think of this idea of Glean is another one,
What's
where
Glean?
it's so they're the same thing, kind of a workflow automation. They allow it's kind of building custom workflows to tie together different systems. If you want to build, like an internal chat bot or account researcher, I mean, I think the excitement around it is like the use cases are basically constrained to your imagination.
Yeah.
But they're another one from like I kind of think of it as like an orchestration and unifying type of tool. So to me, those are always really good ones because like if you think about going back to the Clay example, right? I'm gonna give you a good example, but like let's say you want to have data from three disparate systems kind of tied together in a workflow, right? And let's say it's, I don't know, I'm just going to make up, but like Salesforce, maybe Exactly, and I don't know, a third tool, right? Workday or something, right? Like, so let's say you're trying to figure out compensation. Like, traditionally, you have to have someone who has those three skill sets, right? And
Mhm.
and has a deep knowledge of like how do we get this data together? How do we integrate it? Whatever. What you can do now is like if you have a good understanding of data, you can kind of just pull data from the different systems through an orchestration tool like or a workflow tool like Clay. And now it's like you don't have to have the level of expertise. You just have to know where the data is. And then you can say, okay, I can pull it and I want it to do this. I want it to like marry up with these things. So there's a lot of like flexibility that's afforded from that. So I think that that's the first bucket I think about when I'm investing in it. As I mentioned, the second one is like I think leveraging it in account-based research. So Copy AI, I think is a good tool. They have a bunch of different use cases, but one most notably is account research, and sort of being able to ingest all of the 10Ks, all of the whatever investor calls, all like you can just ingest a lot of data very quickly and synthesize it down to something that
Mhm.
is actionable for the rep.
Hmm.
So those types of tools thinking about as well. I think those are the two like main areas that I've kind of focused on. But the last piece I would sort of add is, and a good example is because I follow them on LinkedIn, or I see them on LinkedIn a relatively decent amount, and I know some folks that work there. Is like a company like Vanta, right?
Mm.
So
Oh yeah.
they're interesting because they have a whole part of their RevOps org that is essentially focused on like leveraging AI as a business. And so it's not just like what tools, but it's like what workflows, How can we better manage our data? Like, how can we really leverage? So I think there is also this emergence of people that's really their job is to figure out
Hmm.
how to leverage it, because we're in really early innings of it, right? And so it's like that's another fascinating piece of like what is, how is AI going to impact kind of how you build your teams and how you think about structuring your organizations.
Yeah, and I think I saw Shopify's CEO come out recently said, "Hey, like before you hire somebody, I want to see if AI can do the work or not."
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And it's just listening to you talk about this, the question I guess is going to go to maybe I don't know if there's an opinion on this one, but will we start to see an AI officer inside of a company, or does it land into the CTO or the CIO's lap? And because I'm thinking, what I'm wondering is, are data lakes now going to be the most prized possession inside of a company?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting, and in working at Pinecone, so Pinecone is a vector database, which is sort of an infrastructure tool that is one of the components to building generative AI. And one of the, I think, interesting, I don't know if it was a podcast or a conference panel or something, but essentially um, the TLDR of it was that the data, your data is actually that's the moat, that's the thing that's valuable, right?
Right.
Because I've heard a lot of these companies are like, there's no more data out there to train these models on. There's like they've literally ingested the internet. And so it's like you go and you start thinking about like, okay, well, how are companies going to be able, how could they potentially commoditize their data, right? And how could they build, like, how can what is proprietary to a data or to a company that they could essentially say, yeah, like we can build an LLM that is specific to a certain type of audience, right? and
Mm,
and so like I do think that the data at the end of the day it is the thing, right? It's like it's it's like the lowest common denominator of what you need to build effectively. And so yeah, I think that it's going to be the I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it evolves. So to your original question though, of like where this sits,
yeah.
that's a damn good question. And like I would I tend to think that it's going to become its own thing. And I say that not because like at least thus far, I think it's very much been centered around the CTO or the IT organization, right? And
Mhm.
um, I think that's the right spot for it. But I think that AI unto itself is there's so many complexities to it, right? And there's so many challenges. And like you kind of think of what AI can do, and then like what would fall on the desk of that person, right? Because there's the building of it, but then there's also like the implications of it, right? Like
Mhm.
and so how do you sort of monitor AI in cases like how do you ensure that there's not bias in the data, right? If like you're an insurance company, like how do you ensure that there's not inherent bias that's learned within within the AI. And I think the other thing is like, some of these co-pilots, like, okay, you just equipped a coder or an engineer to write 1 million lines of code a day. I'm just giving an extreme
Yeah.
example, but like,
Yeah.
okay, who's checking it? Right? Like as far
Well,
as that, like in my experience, that you have kind of code based checks and things like that on tools that you ship, and like obviously yes, there's the easy answer is, well, there's software that does that, but now you're in this world of like, okay, well, you've got a software stacked on another software. There's not may not be a human in the loop, or there's certainly not a human in the loop that can like meaningfully oversee it. So I think there
mhm.
are going to be some like regulatory and like operational evolutions and conversations that are going to happen, because again, I think we're like in inning one of what this AI thing is, and it has already evolved so much in the past two
Mhm.
years. You know what I mean? It's crazy. And so you know there's a there are gobs and gobs and gobs of money behind these companies and behind and invested in AI, and so it's definitely here to stay. I think it's a matter of like what what is the purview of that AI of that, like that chief AI officer? Because I do think it's like how do you there's different work streams of it, right? It's like, how do you deploy AI in your product? How do you deploy AI within
Mhm.
your company? How do you, deploy AI as, you know, as part of, like, the infrastructure of your business. So I think there's different, like, there's so many different facets of what that role could be. It would be really interesting.
And then the question's gonna be what's the skill set of that person? Especially when you think of, like, the revenue side. Is it this, would there's a security component to the
Mhm.
information, right? There was, y- go back to COVID. Hey, if it's touching my data lake, I want less. You said less is
Mhm.
more, and that seems to be a constant thread, right? I don't want to
Yep.
have 1,000 tools touching my data lake. I want to minimize the number of tools that are touching it, because then I minimize any of the breaches. So, is it a skill set of a security officer, or is it a skill set of a technology officer, or is it a skill set of a revenue officer, or excuse me, is are we going to see this emergence of the data scientist become into that role, but there's a content and a context conversation of, I have the two, but how do I apply it and where does it go? It's an interesting topic, and I I don't think we even planned for, this conversation, but it's kind of interesting to think about where it's going to go and who's going to own it, because at some point it has to be actioned, but how? And is there a conversation where somebody is that AI leader inside the company that's so connected? But to your point, you have tech stacked on tech stacked on tech. Who's looking at it? And it brings me back to another revenue operations leader that he jokingly did this years and years ago, but he said, like, I don't always test my code, but when I do, it's in production. And
Yep.
so if it is launched and AI does launch it because AI did its check to say
Right.
all of these things made sense, but then the usability and how does that get connected? It's an interesting question, and I'm not sure how to answer it.
It is, and then I have an even further sort of philosophical question is like, so in the example of, you know, a code, a software engineer, or some of, even using myself or yourself as an example. Um, One of the things that I've sort of like thought about, especially as I've done more work in consulting, it's like when you think about, like, what is someone paying for when they're paying for a consultant, right? And like the
Mm,
reality is they're paying the premium to leverage your lived in experiences and pains as an operator, right? And so
yeah.
like, and which have been accumulated over years of doing and screwing up and, you know, pain, right? And so if now you've got, okay, we can do, let's just using the example of, data engineer or a software engineer, right? Okay, if I can hire two software engineers, and that person, those two people can do the work of 10, right?
Mhm.
Objectively good outcome for the business, less headcount, less overhead, etc. But who's to say that, like, where 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 are people getting experience? Like, where are they learning to build? Where are they being mentored by someone who's like, yeah, like, this is how, like, a textbook would tell you to code this, but actually if you do it like this, um
Mhm.
it's better. And like an example for me, like, it is like, anybody that's worked in RevOps, it's like, can tell you, uh, Salesforce stinks at lead routing. You can do it, you can build it. Like, there is a way to build it by the book, but it stinks. And like,
Mhm.
but that's something that you would only know if you've tried to build it, or have learned, and kind of felt that pain. And so like the question then becomes like, what is the impact on career progression and like building within a company a culture of like, yeah, you want to have some people that have been there and done that, but you also want some people that are up and comers, and but they can learn. And so I don't know. I think there's this also like a more existential conversation around like, what does it mean for how, like, the workforce? And the counter also is like, if you have a person who's really senior as an engineer, what's to say if they come in and they're like, oh, I'm doing the work of 10 people, why shouldn't I be paid for way
Mhm.
more than that? You know what I mean? Now there's a lot of leverage on that side. So I think that's this is the fascinating component of AI is there's so many layers to it. There's so many elements to it. But like kind of bringing it back to where we started, which is like when I think about how do you leverage a tool, I think there are. I typically try to focus on the things that I can control, right? And so, like a lot of the stuff we talked about, like I think is super thought provoking. I'm not nearly smart enough, nor am I the right person to solve any of those problems. So it's like, cool, yeah, like I'm here for it. But when it comes to like RevOps specifically, I tend to look at like I tend to be really simple. It's like, what are the outcomes I'm looking for, um, and what or who can I best leverage to get there in the most efficient way possible, right?
Mm.
And so, like when it comes to AI, trying to understand like what is the outcome I'm looking for, and is what I'm trying to build achievable with that, right? Because if you don't start with a really good understanding of where you're trying to go, what the end in mind is, like it's really, really hard to stay focused on that thing because the reality is there's a lot of distraction, right?
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, there's a lot of tools you could use, but if you focus on like the process and on the end in mind, like then you can be really specific on what the things are that you're trying to solve. And like I don't think there is a panacea for here's how you use AI, right? And here's how you
Mhm.
use technology. It's like it's dependent upon your situation, it's dependent upon your business, it's dependent upon like the people that you're trying to get to adopt it, right? Like there's so many inputs to it.
Yeah. And so it's interesting as you're talking about that, simple scales is the thing that comes to mind. And I think it's,
Mm.
because with AI, can we get things much more complex? Yeah. But the other thing we're trying to do is remove the complexity with AI. So it makes our day to day a little bit easier and, take some of these things away. And the other thing you mentioned, I go back to a friend of mine. His name's Luciano Borsato. He played in the NHL with the Winnipeg Jets. He was where, if
Mm.
any of you are hockey fans, he played with Teemu Selanne when he set the goal record. And so, but he spoke to one of he did a talk with one of my teams. And as we're preparing for it, he said something to me that I've not forgotten. And he said, winning is hard. Everybody wants to win, but not everybody does. And who do people want to talk to? They want to talk to winners. What do winners talk about? They talk about losing and why.
Yeah.
Why do they talk about losing? Because that's the experience. And you're right. When you join a company, they're getting your experience. You can't buy experience as an
Right.
individual. You just have to experience it and you bring it to a company. So there's some interesting things there. So sorry, I know we're getting long here and not to go too far. For you, as you're implementing AI, I have this sort of saying, everybody likes new, nobody likes different. And when you do both at the same time, it can cause friction or uncertainty.
Mhm.
As you're integrating these new AI tools, it might be taking place of certain people and roles of responsibility. How do you manage that change internally? What are the things that you do?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I think the approach that I take would be consistent with AI as it would be any other process that I was rolling out, technology that I was rolling out, et cetera. And like for me, it's always start with the why. Like,
Mhm.
I'm a big believer in transparency, right? Here's why we're doing what we're doing, right? We're either trying to, we're inconsistent in our process, we're inefficient in our process, right? We think there's an opportunity to just be better and up level. But I think like for anybody that's when you're implementing a new technology, especially one that seems daunting, it's like, okay, I got to learn something new, right?
Mhm.
This is going to disrupt my day to day. And so, like, for me, as part of the why, it's like also include the value. Hey, Carl, you're a sales rep. This is why this tool is valuable for you. This is how it's going to make your life easier. This is how it's going to make you more effective. This is how it's going to make you win more, right?
Mhm.
Like, and like, I love the point you made because also, like, you ask almost any like big time athlete or really anybody, it's like the stuff they remember from their career are the losses. They don't like, they can rattle off what's your favorite win. It's like, yeah, I'm sure they have them, but like they'll be able to tell you in much more vivid detail the agony that they went through in like how I lost this game or how I missed this shot or how like because that's just as a competitor, like that's the stuff that sticks with you because that's the stuff that drives you and that's the stuff that like you learn from and evolve from. And so
Yeah.
I think always starting with the like what are we trying to get out of this? And in a situation where, um, obviously if your goal is to replace an entire organization, right? Like with I'm just again using the AI SDR example, like that's a challenging conversation no matter what, right? Like it's like there's not an easy way to do it. So it's not like you would be going like, hey guys, like please adopt this. It's going to probably replace you, right? Like I think it's just like situationally you have to be aware of the audience and what you're trying to accomplish with it. But yeah, I think allowing people the space to be uncomfortable and to voice their uncomfortability, right? And like being able to be heard. Because I think like that's often the part that sometimes gets sort of smoothed over is like, yeah,
Mm,
we're rolling out this technology and like even an easy differentiation. Like think of how different you would look at something if I said to you and said, hey Carl, I'm rolling out this new like automated outreach tool, right? Just to be more effective versus, hey, Carl, like we have this new tool. One of the things we've realized is that, with reps that are able to get over this threshold of outreach, they see a 5% uptick in pipeline generation. And so we think we can automate this for you. And with that extra time back, we think you can do X, Y, and Z with it, right? So it's not
mm,
like painting the picture of like, it's not I think it's not in a lot of cases, like it's not a replacement technology. It's an enhancing technology, right? And so I think that
mm.
that's a really critical way, especially with AI, of like using it as an enhancing technology, not necessarily as a replacing technology. Is something that I've kind of found some success with.
Yeah, and I think that's the great it's sort of like the build upon, right? I'm gonna build upon your role so it can be easier. Okay, so let's get wrapped up here. I'm I know I've taken I feel like this topic we could talk for hours. Uh,
Sure.
so going back to the force multiplier technologies topic, are there a couple that you're really excited for? Or and then conversely is what are the operational tactics that you would tell somebody today walking away from it? Here's what I would suggest for you to consider as you're thinking about AI technology as a force multiplier.
Sure.
What would those be?
So I know it's one of your axioms, simple scale, simple scales. Like for me, I think when I'm approaching any of those operational things, I think it's really, really important that you be honest with yourself about where your business is. And like any tool, AI or otherwise, is only as good as the data you're feeding into it, right? And so like understanding that AI is might be the coolest thing on the block, but if you're not in a place to adopt it, or you're essentially forcing yourself to adopt it, like it could very much be a huge disruption to your business, right? And so I think like being realistic around like what your readiness is for it. And so like for one of the companies I'm working with right now, like it is 100% just a walk. Like they don't care about these massive, like super automated, super streamlined account research. Like that's a great down the road. They just want their reps in Salesforce, right? Like they just want their reps to do the basics. And so like I think it's really important to understand where you are and to like kind of um uh, limit what you're focused on based on that. And so like when so that would be the first thing, is just like be realistic and make sure you have a really good foundation and understanding of how your data is structured and where yours is, because that's going to power the whole thing.
Mhm.
I think the other thing is like for me, again, I'm super bullish on a lot of these workflow tools. I think they are really a technology that has allowed operators specifically to be just a lot more efficient and to do more. So I think being open to like where you can drive efficiency and like where you can really say, okay, I can move the needle here, and like understanding if I invest some time in here, this is something that at scale can save us a lot of time, can save us a lot of energy, and can save us a lot of effort. So like trying to balance that with the business, right? Especially if you're in a scaling organization, like understanding where do you want to index on fast and where do you want to index on sort of like scalable and robust, and sort of balancing those two things. But yeah, for me, I think AI is like my litmus is and any tool is like, does it allow the end user to do something faster, more efficiently, or more consistently? And if it checks those boxes, like as sort of a line of sight test, like, okay, it's something I'll explore further. But I think that's the big thing. And then like the last piece I would say is like a little bit more of an abstract thought, but I think when you're solving any problem, especially if you're really close to it, you tend to over like have blinders on. And so like for me as a RevOps person or as an operations person in general, like your stakeholder is sales, marketing, customer success, field operations, solutions engineering. Um, like pulling them into the conversation and being like, hey, this is something I think is a problem. Do you
Mhm.
agree? Right?
Yeah.
Do you feel the same pain that I perceive? And is this, if I solve this problem, is that actually as valuable as I think it is? And so taking the time to sort of like, again, really understand the requirements of what you're trying to do and using and understanding where you can use technology as an accelerant of that process. That's where I think you really get the biggest bang for your buck, right? Where it's like, hey, um, if we do invest in centralizing compensation reporting, that's something we're spending 50 hours a month on, both aggregating and reporting on, and then getting out to the field. And it's a huge pain point for the reps. They don't know what they're making. They don't know, but whatever. Like that's just an example. But like that's a situation where like, yeah, if we solve this problem and if we can do it really well and systematically, it's gonna be a huge uplift for the business. So I think like
Right.
that's a big thing, because you also fall in this trap of like, man, there's so many shiny cool things out there, but it's like, is it really is it really gonna is the return really going to be there, right?
Right.
And then ultimately, are you building something that is now 55 different tools that are wired together, and now you've created a system of complexity that's really really hard to maintain and optimize and manage. So I think those would be my biggest takeaways. Is just like having a framework for how you evaluate the problem you're trying to solve, right? Like, is it, for me, is it making the end user more efficient, more effective, or is it allowing them to do more faster? Like kind of that's the framework that I think through, and I think putting it through that lens has been really really helpful for me.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Don't chase shiny things because there's always a new shiny thing for people to
Oh
look
yeah,
at.
no yeah.
Awesome. So, Kyle, thank you for this. Where can people find you if they wanted to
LinkedIn
talk
is,
to you
yeah,
more?
LinkedIn is probably the area I'm most responsive. Just shoot me a message. I'm relatively active, and at least, or I should say, at least responsive. But yeah, it's been a pleasure as always. I love these conversations are wide reaching and ever changing, and I think that's part of the love of it. Is it's just there's so many different angles and avenues you can come at it with. So I appreciate the time and
Yeah.
appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for doing this. And so that wraps up another episode of Revenue Problem Solvers. I want to thank Kyle. Thank you very much for sharing these invaluable insights and strategies you can put into action immediately. If you found value in today's conversation, please like the episode, subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to so you don't miss an episode. But if you do have feedback on how to be better or a topic you'd like to talk about or comments that, hey, I want to learn more, I'd like to hear from you. Or, hey, if you want to be a member on the show, I'd love to have you. I enjoy these conversations so much. Thank you for investing your time with us today. Remember, success leaves clues, and every revenue problem has a solution. Sometimes you just need the right conversation to find it. Until next time, it's Carl with the Revenue Problem Solvers, helping you turn your obstacles into opportunities. Thanks for being with us today. See you later.